Well, a lot of things to talk to you about. The Gazette a couple of days ago ran an article on coroner's inquest. Let's talk about the process first and your thoughts on it, and let's talk a little bit about that article in the Gazette.
Yeah, coroner's inquest is required under Montana law whenever there's death, simplified by means of the government, like you might have a death in a detention facility, or obviously the one that the Gazette article focused on was officer-involved shootings. Those are required. My office, by statute, is required to assist the coroner in conducting those inquests, and we do it in front of a jury of people, similar to a jury trial and similar to a grand jury proceeding in federal court, and where we present evidence and the coroner's jury renders a decision.
You know, part of the article says that we're talking about a case here, maybe a couple of cases. The officers were found justified in shooting and killing a suspect sometimes after less than 10 minutes of jury deliberation. So these must have been pretty, cut and dry, really, for 10 minutes, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. I've personally conducted quite a few inquests over the years, and I've had coroner's juries come back quickly, and I've had coroner's juries take time. One of the things that we do in an inquest that kind of gets overlooked is we've used them because ultimately what all the coroner's jury is doing is making a recommendation to me to essentially prosecute or not prosecute a case. We've used them when we've had suspicious shootings or traffic deaths. We don't use them very often, but we use them in that regard as well. We try to seek the wisdom of the jury. The other thing that people don't realize in these inquests, unless they participated in them, is that coroner allows the coroner juror to ask questions. And oftentimes during the process, like when a witness is on the stand, the juror will ask the witness questions.
Wow. Another part of the article, it says Montana has no laws requiring law enforcement agencies to bring in independent investigators when their officers kill people in the course of duty. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and we've tried to modify that over the years here in Yellowstone County. One of the things that we do, Scott, to avoid the appearance of the impropriety of some of these agencies investigating themselves, is we'll have the Division of Criminal Investigations from the Department of Justice review the investigation when it's presented to me. They will make suggestions to me, written suggestions that something in the investigation wasn't done right, or I'd do more in this area. So we have that sort of independent review before we take it. We did try for a while to have the agency swap investigation, so we'd have like the sheriff's office investigate the police department and vice versa. The problem is it's sort of a resource allocation. The police department is so much larger an organization and has so much more incidents and involvements that it was almost unfair on the resources of the sheriff. We also tried it with the Division of Criminal Investigations, the state agency, to investigate our cases, but again, it was just a resource problem. The state didn't have enough resources to adequately investigate these things. So it's been a challenge to figure out this resource allocation.
Let's talk about something that went into effect on July the 1st, the statute of limitations on child sexual abuse cases. Let's talk a little bit about that this morning.
Yeah, there was a big bill. It was pushed publicly by the case in Miles City with the athletic trainer from years ago. But essentially, the legislature ended any statute of limitations, the time to bring charges against anybody committing a sexual crime against a child. But it went one step further, sort of in the process of the law being created, that it required county attorneys to take in all the reports of suspected child abuse. So rather than a law enforcement agency or Child Protective Services, through the Department of Public Health and Human Services, taking those reports and keeping them and then investigating them. They get them as well as my office does now, and then my office is responsible for keeping all of those reports, all of those records, all of those interviews, whatever it is. Doesn't matter if the case is prosecuted or whatever. We have to keep all of that information for 25 years.
Yesterday I had
huge task.
Yesterday, I had Department of Transportation Director Mike Tooley on. June 2019 was one of the deadliest months in history for Montana deaths on highways, and a lot of those were, distracted drivers. Some ones, drinking and driving on drugs or whatever. Are you finding that in Yellowstone County too? That some of these accidents that lead to fatalities, drugs or alcohol are involved?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I think a good number of those accidents that we lose life are caused by people that are under the influence or impaired driving. It's truly a sad problem in our state, but one that we continue to fight to try to find ways to deal with it. As you know, I tried my best to get a repeat DUI offender bill passed through the legislature, but I got vetoed by the governor. Again, I think the interim committees, the legislative committees that meet during the legislative break, are going to take up the issue of DUI. It's my hope that we can have an honest discussion about this impaired driving problem in Montana and reduce that number.
Both the city, county have been wrestling with their brand new budgets for 2019-2020. City of Billings had to do some cutbacks, overtime hours for the police department, which more than likely next year we will have a safety mill levy. I was talking with Yellowstone County Sheriff Mike Linder, and there's going to be some cuts, overtime hours, especially in the detention facility. Did you find any pullback from the commissioners on any part of your budget?
No, I think the commissioners are well educated about our budget situation. I feel like they have done the best they can to help the public safety entities that rely on those funds. The overtime issue is a tricky issue, and I'll give you a practical example. The practical example is I've got to prepare witnesses, officers, for court. And oftentimes I've got to get them to come into my office, during a time when they're not out protecting us to prepare for court for a case they investigated. With those cut overtime budgets, we've got to be real careful how we do that because we want them prepared for court, so we put on a good case, but it's going to be a challenge. And so I've had a few conversations with Police Chief St. John and as well as Sheriff Linder about how we can deal with this. It's going to be a challenge moving forward.
Now, if somebody came up to you and said to County Attorney Twito, why do you think we need a safety mill levy? What would you tell them?
Well, I would tell them, if you want your community to be safe, if you want those boots on the ground, then you need to vote for a mill levy. This is the way that these things get funded. It's not the optimum answer or the optimal answer, but it's true. If you want good public safety, that's what you need. But I would challenge a voter to say, hey, what is it going to be spent on? What is it really going to do? And I would demand answers your leaders. It's going to be spent to put, a patrol officer in your neighborhood. Is it going to be spent to make sure that those detention officers are adequately staffed so they can keep the jail safe and keep those people off the street? That's the demand I would have if I, have to pay more money for those services.
This go back to 1973, double homicide here in Billings. Last week on Dr. Oz, Yellowstone County Sheriff Mike Linder was on there, and he talked about this DNA. How important is that becoming more and more to your department?
Well, you certainly have to be knowledgeable about all the new technologies that are out there in terms of being able to solve some of these cases. It's been incredibly helpful in solving some of these cold cases across the country, and our big agencies have embraced this technology, and we're using it. This is